In this episode, the Two Business Guys Mastermind on how to overcome CEO loneliness. Enjoy. This business podcast, the Two Business Guys Mastermind, uncovers for you secrets and share tips and tricks to entrepreneurship as they mastermind on how to have startup, operational, and overall business success so that you can go on to get better results. Enjoy. So, hey, Rob, what is going on with CEOs? I mean, there is
brother.
a huge amount of loneliness. I've been sending you some. Did you get a chance to look at the
I
articles and
did.
stuff?
I looked at them, and it was exactly on point with when I brought this up to you. That was the thing that I was thinking about. Like, and it really sparked, looking at CEO loneliness from, I coach a lot of executives, a lot of CEOs, a lot of CFOs, and chief executives. And one of the things that I was looking at was how to coach them better in, not letting their team know everything that's on their mind. And I started realizing why that was a problem, right? Because when you're in the top spot, a lot of times we don't realize the damage that we can do when we're letting people know what we're thinking about. It's not really an idea, but is just trying to bounce stuff off the, throw stuff at the wall, see what sticks. And so, some of the people that I've coached before, and because I'll coach, a CEO, and I'll coach their executive team normally, and you'll hear stuff that the CEO is saying that then you hear the executive team like scared about it, worried about it. Like, I get to see the entire play out of everything. And what I realized was a lot of CEOs are sitting in that spot, and their executive team are the people that they go to war with. Their executive team are the people that they feel like they can confide in. They feel like they can be, themselves with it, quote unquote. But it's a lonely role when you're the leader, because as the leader, it's really difficult to be yourself, because your job as the leader is to be what your team needs you to be so that they can perform at their best.
That's
And
interesting.
running that dichotomy, I think, becomes a really lonely place for leaders, because you don't get to be yourself. You don't get to let your hair down. You don't get to be, just one of the people, one of the team. You are always in that spot, even if there's mutual, respect and all those different types of things. You still have to realize that you're not what's the word, that you're never able to really kind of relax and let your guard down, and
That's
that can be really lonely.
I've been reading a lot of stuff about, here's an example. I was listening to an entrepreneur talk about why he started his business, right? And he says,
Hmm.
why would I start a business that I wouldn't want my friends, my family? So, I mean, get this right. So he's making a good chunk of change.
Yeah.
He says, he's making over $1 million a year on his businesses. And he says, I get to hang out with my friends and my family. So you hear both ways, right? You say, well, never hire friends, never have family. And it's probably because if you had to fire,
Hmm.
right?
Yep.
And it's
Yep.
sometimes when, like I was just saying to you, why I don't work with certain friends, right?
Hmm.
Because
Hmm.
if I ever had to put you in a headlock, then there's trouble, right? First, I might not win, and especially you with the jujitsu, but that becomes a data point, perhaps
Hmm.
leaning toward, well, then who can I hang with? And if you
Exactly.
decide I can't even hang with the people I lead,
Yeah.
therefore that leads to loneliness. I'm
Yeah.
wondering, when you were commander in the Marine Corps,
Hmm.
did you didn't they call that like fraternizing
Fraternization.
with it?
Exactly.
So is
Yeah.
that a, I don't know, a trained thing? We kind of
Hmm.
get that idea. Don't fraternize because it could lead to
Hmm.
trouble.
Yeah.
And as a result, now we're sitting over here with all these lonely CEOs, and it's a
Yeah.
big deal.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, a lot of times people think that the fraternization rule comes because, because they're just trying to keep people, hierarchies and all the rest of that type of stuff. And I think that one of the problems that people run into is when we look at power dynamics, a lot of times we will look at them and assume that they came from places of mistrust, places of, trying to hoard power for oneself.
Mhm.
But one of the things that you realize is that in any organization, there has to be somebody who is setting the standard. There has to be somebody who is the visionary, who is pushing things forward, who is the embodiment and the stability for the rest of the team.
Mhm.
Right? There is that person. It doesn't have to be necessarily the most talented player on a team. You know, there's a lot of times where the leader in the locker room, like I remember I was reading a story about the US women's national soccer team, the one with Mia Hamm and, you know,
Mhm.
that dominant team that was winning everything, right?
Mhm.
The actual captain of that team wasn't Mia Hamm, even though she was all over TV. It wasn't Brandy Chastain, even she was all over TV. It was actually, and I can't remember the young lady's name, but she was a defensive player,
Mm.
and she was the heart and the soul of that team. She held everybody in line. She did all of those different types of things. She was that person. But one of the interesting things about it is, like, a lot of the stuff that the team enjoyed, that the team did, she didn't really partake in a lot. She didn't do a whole bunch of the rah rah stuff. And if you look at, you know, and it was a story, you gotta go listen to it. I can't remember. I think it may have been an NPR story. But one of the things that that you see with it is there's there's a loneliness that comes with being a leader, regardless of externally imposed duties. Because one of the things that happens is, if I'm going to hold somebody accountable, that means that I have to do it in a certain way. That means that I have to approach them, that I have to interact with them in a
Mhm.
way that says, I'm more concerned about you being your best than I am about necessarily me getting what I want.
Mm.
Right. And what that means is, in certain situations, right? You know how it is. In certain situations, you want to vent your frustration. You want to just say, this sucks, so whatever, right? But if you're a leader, you can't do that. Right? If you're somebody else, you can do that because you can always apologize and come back and all the rest of that. But when you're the leader, it's a larger withdrawal than it is for a normal team member. And it has a more long-lasting effects when you lose that ability of being the helper, being the person that everybody else can be themselves around. You are the
Mm.
person that is creating the environment. You are the person that is setting the standard. And therefore, your behavior matters more to the standard than anybody else's. And what that does inherently, right? Fraternization, we get taught about in the Marine Corps because of the fact that it's not what you're doing, it's how it's perceived. It has nothing to do with what's actually happening. What's
Mm.
actually happening may not be a problem, but how it's perceived may undermine everything that you're trying to accomplish.
Man, I tell you, I was looking at a podcast. Have you heard of the podcast Diary of a CEO?
Yeah.
All
Yeah.
right,
That's the
so
British guy,
yeah,
right?
the British dude, right?
Uh-huh.
And it's funny how, you know, he left this big company,
Mm-hmm.
millions and millions of dollars. Now I don't know if he left it on the table. I don't think he did. But I think
He
he
probably
took an
got a nice
exit.
buyout package. Yeah.
Yeah, he took an exit and he said, and you know, I'm gonna get this quote wrong, but he said something like, the moment it became unfun in anything, yeah, I'm out. I don't
Yep.
care how much money I'm making. And with nothing to start. So he started the podcast,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
unfun, right? In other
Yeah.
words, here's a person that says, look, you know, I started the business. I think he started with one of his best friends,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
they built it up to be some behemoth, you know,
Right.
$100 million, north of
Exactly.
$100 million kind of a deal. And then he says, yeah, I'm out.
Right.
And they were like, what do you mean? Right. And then you had the Spotify CEO who's still
Mm-hmm.
with it and
Exactly.
still grow. He said, and I remember listening to him, he said, I had to grow as a CEO. I had to learn to do some different things. Or you think of Zuckerberg, or you think of
Mm-hmm.
how then, or what's available for CEOs to grow when we think about who are they rubbing elbows with?
Exactly. Now that's a really important point. And I think that the biggest thing first is just to let CEOs know that that's a normal thing, right? A lot of people will look at somebody that builds $100 million company or a $10 million company or just a couple $100,000 company, but you got a couple employees, right? And what most people will do is they will call that person a leader, but actually that's not a leader, right? That person can be a leader, but it's not necessarily true that just because you have employees, you're a leader. Just because you're in charge of people, quote
Mm.
unquote, you're a leader, right? And one of the things that you see with that, right? Robert Kiyosaki talks about this in Cash Flow Quadrant. If you have a business that if you leave for a year, the business will fail, you don't actually have a big business. You don't have a business system. You have a
Mm.
job that is really reliant on you
Man,
as the
that's tough.
specialist, as the person, right?
That's
And there's a
what
lot of people by
that's
force of
tough.
personality that will build amazing jobs, right? And then they get to the point where in order for the job to not to be fun again, they have to be able to give some of this stuff to other people. And that's where they realize their skill set is lacking. That's where they realize, oh, I don't know how to do this. They've been hustling and grinding and doing the work. And they were even able to get some other people to do the work with them, right? But that's still not the real leadership work of developing an organization. They talk about, there's a book, Change Man or Managing Transitions by William Bridges, and one of the things that they talk about in that book is, there are different stages of companies, right? And so oftentimes you'll see the founders won't be the one that grows and scales the company, because just like you said, it's not fun anymore. They're not doing the same work. Growing and scaling a company is building systems, putting SOPs in place, putting policies and procedures, and doing in process improvement. It's a lot of not fun, not sexy stuff. But what it's designed for is to help other people do amazing things. And for a lot of founders, a lot of entrepreneurs, we're achievers. We like checking boxes. We like getting the stuff done. We like being in the trenches. And so there are a lot of people that get stuck in that space, and that's why it becomes lonely. So to your question, what are the resources, right? First thing is to realize that you're not alone. It's a normal kind of rite of passage as a CEO, as an entrepreneur, as a leader, that there will come a time when you start to see that your time is actually better spent doing this management and structuring stuff than being out in the trenches. And there's a grieving period that happens there. So some of the articles that we were looking at just before we got on, we're talking about some of the things that entrepreneurs can do. Number one, mentorship. Somebody that has been where you're trying to go and talk to them, go and learn about what it is. I remember when I was getting ready to join the Marine Corps, one of the best things that happened to me was I got attached to the Navy ROTC program at the University of Memphis that's where I was living, and I was teaching in Memphis. And what I would do is I'd go work out with them and do PT with them. And so there were people in the group. First of all, the officer in charge was an officer in the Marine Corps, so he had already been through the process that I was trying to go through. But also the gunny, the assistant officer in charge, had been a sergeant instructor at OCS, so he understood what I was about to go through and what it meant to become a Marine Corps officer, because he had been someone who actually conducted the training for officers to be or candidates to become officers. And then we had people in the actual organization that had already graduated, right? They had already been through OCS, but they hadn't graduated school yet. So they weren't officially lieutenants because they didn't have a degree, but they had already done all of the training and gotten all of that. So they had already been through it. So I had mentors that had been through the process a while ago, had been through the process from a different perspective, and had been just ahead of me in the process. And what that did is it made a lot of stuff less scary, because I could ask them questions. I could talk to them, and they could make me feel better about some of the feelings that I had, some of the things that I was worried about, some of the things that I didn't know. They could make it less lonely, right? I didn't have to just think about these things in my head.
That's, I remember some of the early days of starting things, and I had an office, right? I'm gonna tell you, this is one of those loneliness factors, right? And I was just a one man bang, right? And I remember, man, I had this office. Now I've had offices twice, and the same problem existed, right? I thought, this is a fluke. But I hated going to the office, because once I was there, it was just me.
Yeah.
I was there. I had all the books. I had all the stuff there. I had the computer, and I hated going to the office. So guess what? That money was a waste. and one of the reasons why I was fighting tooth and nail when my wife wanted to get in office is because I said, it's lonely over there at the office. And you're running your thing. It's not nobody in your ear every day. Now, I would assume, though, that there's some, as I think about what can be monetized for us, how I do. Right? Monetize your life guy, right? So I think, what can be done? And I found that there's some amazing apps that are kind of addressing not that specific thing, because these are higher level, but just on some of the other levels, they were talking about how well, you don't have to be alone because there's this app that you call in and you're around other people, kind of like an accountability app.
Wow.
Yes. So of course
Okay.
I'm fired up about anything that is appable and automatable, right? So, but I would assume that um that there's still a struggle, especially with one
Hmm.
of the articles I saw. It's like, look, some of the people that you just brought in, you like them. They're right. Their personalities are kind of close to yours,
Hmm.
but you can't
Hmm.
hang out with them.
Yeah,
Or there's a danger in hanging out
exactly. Yeah.
when because if you have to Elon Musk them, right, and fire them, right? If you just got to go in and you're getting ready to fire your friend, right? Even and I've noticed this, right? Even Elon doesn't work. His brother works on other businesses,
Exactly.
but not
Exactly.
for. And
Yeah.
I would assume he's just as smart and all this kind of stuff. But
Yeah. And that go like I was saying, that goes to it's not and a lot of people think that it's like, the big stuff like don't sleep with people and all, but it's much more nuanced than that, right? The whole key, like I was saying before, is that with fraternization, your people, because you're the leader, are going to hold you in their mind to a different standard.
Mhm.
And if you don't realize that, then you undermine your authority by living at the lower standard that they're not holding you to. But when you do realize it, even if it's as slim as this, right? It's not a tremendous difference, but it's just a little bit of difference. If you don't if you realize when you realize it and you act accordingly, what it means is you can't just let your hair down, as they say. You can't just be you. You can't just be open and honest and vulnerable and all the rest of those types of things. You can be more of those things, but it's really difficult to be you because you are a standard bearer. And until you've created an environment, until you've created a culture where everybody is able to be on the leadership level and understand, like there's a lot of work that's got to go into it. In
Mhm.
the best places, maybe you can be the type of leader that can let your hair down and everybody's equal because they see themselves as leaders as well, and they're you're just a team working together.
I
But
think that's
that's
a
like
think tank, isn't it?
you know what I mean? Like that's that's the 1% of the 1%, right?
Yeah.
But in a normal, especially if you're an entrepreneur starting your thing, trying to build this thing, right? That realization that I have to have a stiff upper lip. I have to have what we call in Marine Corps. You have to have bearing. I remember one of the things I was reading a book, and this was about Chesty Puller. And Chesty Puller is a famous Marine Corps general. Like he
What
is
was his name?
everybody. He's
Chesty
Chesty
Puller.
Puller. Yeah, Louis Chesty Puller, right? And they called him Chesty because his whole chest was
Oh,
decorated with
Okay,
medals,
okay.
right?
It was
Um,
what?
it was decorated with medals. Like he had
Oh,
been
okay,
in, he
Chesty.
was in the Marine Corps. He was a World War II and a Korean War hero. He was a general during those wars, but he had been in the Marine Corps since the Banana Wars back down in Haiti
Right,
and
right.
Nicaragua and everything. So, and the story he was telling was when he was in Haiti, he was working with they had sent the Marines down to to support the local the local armies that were fighting against some revolutionaries or whatever.
Mhm.
And so he was there. He was a young sergeant. Well, no, he was a young lieutenant at this point in time. He had already gone through being a sergeant, doing all this type stuff. It's like the 1920s, and so he had went down and he's going and they're engaging with the enemy, right? And there's this Haitian sergeant major that's there, and he's walking around, and there's bullets flying, boom, boom. And the way that he explains it, he's like, the way that they cut these bullets, when they went by, they made this eerie whizzing noise that like
Mhm.
really scares the mess out of you. And so he's a young lieutenant just doing his thing, right? And this is his first taste of combat, and he hit the deck, right? He hears this whizzing, he hit the deck. And the sergeant major pulls him aside. He's like, "Hey, sir, you got to understand that when you're in charge, everybody's watching you. When you get scared, when you fall down, then their morale plummets." And then
Mhm.
he tells him in his ear, he's like, "Plus, you don't hear the one that kills you."
Right. Yeah. If you can hear him,
Exactly. If you can hear it, it
he
ain't, it
might
ain't, it
pass you.
ain't, it ain't hitting. And
That's
that
interesting.
reality is a reality of leadership, right? And what does that do psychologically? What it does is it says, I'm scared, but I can't show it,
Mm.
right? For a leader, that creates a lonely space because you don't
Mm.
get to show your real feelings. You don't get to be authentic. You don't get to get help from others because you're not you're having a bad day or all the rest of that. Because you showing it can actually negatively impact the morale of the organization in a much graver way than everybody else. Now, again, in great organizations, when you build your culture properly, then you lessen that impact, and leaders actually can be more open, more vulnerable. But there's still that little bit of having the weight of the organization on your shoulders. And so I wanted to ask you, right? I know that you've been in leadership, you studied organizational development and organizational excellence, and you've also been around a ton of business owners and business people. What do you feel like are the business owners that you know, the things that you've seen, what are the peer groups or things that business owners can get involved in that are beneficial that you've seen in your career?
Yeah, one of the big, I think the biggest things, I noticed this really with some people that kind of inherited companies, right? Because I watched a couple of people that whose father started the company and then now they're in it, but they came up kind of with us. They did their summer. So I'm thinking of one person in specific. But once they became the head, right, of the organization, they stopped hanging with us. I mean, it was a really marked difference. And I'm just taking one piece and I'm thinking about that, right? And I didn't understand it because guess what? This dude used to be your friend. They used to, shoot the stuff with you, talk about management, behind him, even though it was, his father, right? And talk about, but they were your friend. And then there was a degree of isolation that they must have felt. And then I found that what he would do in this particular case, then he was only hanging with upper stat, bigger folks. I should say it like that, right? And it's almost like when he would come around us, then it almost would be like a cut eye situation. Like, hey man, I know you're my buddy, but I can't acknowledge that anymore, right? So I thought that was odd. What I find myself doing now when I get around people that are way up and whatever, I act just as normal. I mean, I'll call them dude, stuff like that. So they feel and remember, right? I don't stiffen. So if you stiffen, then they've got to maintain that dynamic, if you will. But I try to make them, let them know that I'm not scared of you, right? I mean, there's no fear. And then the way you move, you can almost see that they'll loosen up because they remember that they're just regular people. They put their pants on one leg at a time, just like me. Right? They're using toilet paper, just like me. So I think on both ends, right? Remember the fact that these, people used to be a friend. You came up. Remember that, right? So loosen up. And then for people that get around them, I mean, you can see the difference, right? The diction changes, they make sure they don't drop. I don't do that. Even if I'm writing to them, I'll use colloquialisms. Just hang with them because they're regular people.
Now, my question for you is, when you made the switch, right? Because you've had your companies, you've had employees, you've had people that you were in charge of. What was your experience in that space? How did you, right? Because I remember when I first met you, like you're a relatively private person to normal people, right?
Yeah.
With your friends, you're a lot more open, but to the outside world, you're really private. Like, what do you think when you saw it from the other side? Like, because a lot of people have that experience, and right when we become leaders, we like, I ain't gonna be like that dude, right? That's the idea. It's kind of like when we were kids, we was like, I ain't gonna be like my parents, and then you wind up saying the same stuff your parents were saying, right? Once you have kids, you're like, oh, I get it, right? Yeah. What do you feel like did you have that experience? Do you feel like there was a change when you were in charge now, and what that felt like? Like talk a little bit about
that. Absolutely. And what I found was there was an incident once, right? I remember this, man. I don't know why I remember this, but even to this day, I get put in charge of this department, and so of course they're looking like, first things first, let's break this fool down. Okay? I mean, you're not better than us, kind of a thing, right? And of course, so my big deal was managing by objective, right? That was my big thing. So I say, hey, listen, here's the task in front of us. Let's go to work. But you see the dynamic started changing. I'm sitting over here now. I come over in the group and it's like, what are you doing?
Conversations
Right.
change.
Conversation. But here's something that happened. And it kind of made me go, you know what? Trying to be friends in this kind of environment. This dude, like, he's taller than me. And it was something we were talking about. We hit some milestone or whatever, right? And I put money out of my own pocket and gave it to him because I says, look, if we hit this, y'all get $100 from my pocket, right? Because we were really pushing it. This dude hugged me hard. It was almost the headlock hug because I felt like that. He's taller, so now in his armpit, right? And I felt some kind of way. Even to this day, I was like, I don't want this kind of rah-rah, right? Like, look, bro, I'm not your friend to the point where you can headlock hug me.
Yeah. So say too close, huh?
Right. So you start going, and now my bosses, they never said you got to be careful how you interact, but there was a couple of times where I had to bring a couple of them in and say, I don't want to see this kind of mess. And you could almost see the deterioration in the friendship, if you will, because we all kind of came up together.
Yeah.
Thought immediately. But then, exactly. To the point what we're talking about today is that loneliness starts. You're kind of realizing I can't, do this anymore. I can't hang like this anymore. And it was all, even when we would go out for, if we went out for drinks or something like that, right? You cannot get drunk.
Exactly.
Right. Exactly. Even if you're a fool when you get drunk, you got to go. You got to either say, you know what, here's a couple of sips and I'm outie. I'll pay for everything, whatever.
Right.
And I can see how that leads to loneliness.
Yeah.
Right. It absolutely does. But then if we talk about strategies, everyone that's listening right now, and you're an entrepreneur, just starting out, you're doing your own thing, understand that there's apps. I was thinking about the BetterHelp app, which
I was about to say, yes, therapy is definitely, that's where I started my therapy journey was on, and well, not started, but that's where I found a good therapist, because I had a couple of bad therapists before. Not bad, just not good fits. I don't want to disparage them. They were good people, anyway. Right? They were good people. They just wasn't a good fit for me. But I used BetterHelp. I was going to say that therapy is, I think that, right, it's something that so many of us
now. No.
See, but that's the whole thing. It's not
to talk
even
to. That's why we do this podcast, right?
Exactly, right.
But talk to each other at least.
But I think that's something that's so important, right? That key is that you need a place where you can be you. And in what one of my mentors, Darren Hardy, he says, in all of your flawsomeness, right? All of your flaws and your awesomeness, your flawsomeness, you can be you. Because I know for me, sometimes I just need to not have to be on. Sometimes I need to not have to be the one in charge, right? Like, sometimes I want to just be able to be like, you know what? I'm going to be lazy right now just to see what it feels like, right? Like, or I'm going to say the wrong thing, or I'm going to argue a point that makes no sense and have somebody correct my position, right?
That's
like
funny.
Just to go down that rabbit hole for a second, instead of being the one that's always trying to bring the conversation to a conciliatory response, instead of the one that's always trying to bring everybody, right? Like, those are the types of things that when you walk around in leadership positions, especially if you're a leader in your family, you're a leader in your business, you're a leader in your community, right? Like, what winds up happening is you don't have anywhere where you can be not the leader. And I think that really hits a lot of people, and it becomes overwhelming. And what I would say is you have to seek out places where you're not the leader. You have to seek out places where there are people that you can look up to, like the people that you're around look up to you, and that you can follow and you can learn, and to seek to always be a lifetime learner. If there's one thing that I learned, right, I love how the mentors that I have always talk about their mentors, right? And that chain, there's this constant idea of, I have a mentor that I'm learning stuff from, and so I'm a mentor you with the stuff that I'm learning from my mentor. And as I continue moving along my pathway, I'm constantly learning, but then I'm constantly giving, right? It's this constant kinetic chain, so that you never stop learning, but you also never feel like you have to be like, it's not alone when you got somebody that's like, hey, I understand that feeling. Hey, I know that, right? You have a guide to walk you along that path.
To that, I was listening to Brian Lee, he was on Brian Moran's podcast, right? Capitalism, I think it's called capitalism.com.
Yeah.
And so Brian Lee is the guy, you know, he started LegalZoom. He was an attorney, started LegalZoom. Most people think it was, you know, Robert Shapiro.
Robert Shapiro.
They brought him in as a spokesperson, right?
Exactly.
And they gave him a equity stake. But anyway, and then he helped Jessica Alba start
Honey or Honest.
Honest Company.
Yeah, Honest Company.
Because it started off with like baby diapers and blah blah blah. So and now he has BAM with his wife, BAM Ventures. He says, listen. So he says, in that position, he says, listening to, and this is, you know, maybe not exact quote, but he says it keeps them young. So that to me sounds like it keeps them involved. So now you have money. People are coming to you for money. You get a chance to advise them. So you get to stay relevant. So you get to stay talking to. So imagine this. What are you, and so I'm asking the entrepreneurs out there, what are you starting that keeps you in the loop?
Yeah.
Because just going into, you know, deep think mode and not coming out is like staring into the abyss, right? It starts eventually staring back, and you go, you know what? I kind of like that. I like being alone, and that's something. And I know that personally as a introvert, extrovert, right? An introvert that had to become an extrovert to do the business that I do. You can really feel comfortable not dealing with people. And then when your wife or your loved one asks you, hey, you know, you want to go to this party, you're going, why?
Why right here?
It was really funny. My wife said something, you know, my sister-in-law is up and they were going to some event, right? And she's like, oh, yeah, Randy's not gonna go out. And I said, why you say that? She's like, oh, well, it's gonna be, you know, it's gonna be number one, it's political. And I'm like, well, I'm apolitical, so I'm not really. I said, but she's out it's large crowds. Now I was thinking, you do know what you have here, right? I'm an expert. But I thought, where did that come from that I don't like to be around large crowds? Well, it may be in the fact that now your office is a home office and you will stay in that thing 20 hours a day.
Exactly.
Kind of a thing, right? So entrepreneurs out there, if this is you, if you've self-identified as a potential lonely CEO, just know, like Rob and I are talking about, that there's help, number one, right? On counseling stuff, but do something like we're doing. We've started this podcast so we can make sure that we talk with one another. I miss it. If we go 2 weeks without, it's
exactly.
Like, you know, I have to be over there. I'm busy. I'm doing stuff. I'm breaking stuff apart. Right? But it still is something to, again, what Rob said, not having to be on all the time.
Exactly.
I mean, we put, you know, come on, you know, with dudes, we put a little ears around each other. Hey, how was your week? It was very profitable. You know? we do some of that, but just being able to
not have to lead each other, but to be like on the same level, to work in the synergy and the interdependence of it, where I know that you're going to come with research, you're going to come with what you need, you know that I'm going to come with what we need for, so we don't have to, like, you don't have to feel responsible for me, I don't have to feel responsible for you, we just responsible for ourselves and bringing ourselves to this space. It's a completely different experience.
That's why I heard that Diary of a CEO, he says, you know, this is why he said, I didn't know where it was going, the podcast, right? I just saw another one that he put out, says how my podcast makes $1.5 million a year.
That's
right.
Nice.
How he's got it to now. Now I heard something that he would say. He says, you know, on one of his other podcasts, he says to the guests, he says, and he's talking to this is what I found. This dude is like having a conversation. You can almost see that he's getting his healing in as he's talking to different experts and he's talking to different people. He's just like a regular conversation. Now they got a, you know, beautiful set and all that stuff, right? But it's really about, I just got to make sure that I talk to people and then I stay in the groove and that, you know, and the other day, I'm literally watching, man, he's got the shoes off, right?
That's the whole thing.
They pan down to his feet.
Yeah.
He's got no shoes on.
That's exactly what we're saying. Like, if you listen to his story, what he said was, I got lonely. That's why it wasn't fun anymore. Right. That's one of the things that a lot of people don't realize. And I will say that, like, leadership can be fun, but that doesn't mean that it's the same fun as, you know, hanging out with your buddies. You know, like, I have a whole different experience when I'm just going and playing golf with people or whatever the case may be than I do when I'm leading. Or even if I'm like, it's different when you're playing with a group of golfers that are a similar level that you are versus when you're playing with golfers that like you're the best golfer in the group and you're training people, right? Like we're basketball. When you're the best dude on the floor, you now feel like this responsibility to help your team win because you know that you got to play at your best if y'all gonna have a chance to win, and you're trying to encourage other people to play at their best. You're trying to drop dimes, you're trying to do all this type of stuff. You can't just go out there and be a ball hog and shoot a whole bunch. Like you can, but you got to have a certain temperament, and you got to really have just like I'm out here for me type of thing, which that's not who I am. So I love when I'm going to play ball and there's a whole bunch of people that are as good as me or better. If I'm playing ball and I'm the best dude on the team, like it's a grind.
Don't matter if you're going to shoot hoops on the park, you're still gonna be lonely.
Exactly, it's a grind.
Loneliness. Do what you have to do. Get the examples that you need. And I discovered that because I used to do some solo podcasts, and now I got one. And then you're like the second guest, but it was second, co-host. And I tell you, I couldn't imagine wanting just to do the solo podcast. Now they still are there, kind of mothballed or whatever, but right. I couldn't imagine doing them solo, man.
I know exactly what you mean. That's why I haven't started up the other one. I'm trying to think of, because we've been talking about the Legacy Leader podcast for the longest time. Until I get the format so that I can have people that I'm talking to. And so it actually is, I'm going and trying to study like how to be a better interviewer and how to ask questions. Cause I really want my podcast to be right. Like when we start that one up, I want it to be a podcast where I get to learn about leadership instead of me trying to like teach about leadership. I want to be like that, like the Diary of CEO, those types of podcasts. I love those. Like if you watch Patrick Bet-David's podcast, like it's so awesome. Cause when he has guests on,
he used to be by himself.
Exactly. But you watch him now when he's interviewing, when he has guests on, like he's just asking them like rapid fire. He gets to learn in the space. He gets to be that person that's like, and every once in a while he'll say something, but most of the time he's just learning from the guest. And that is one of the things that I can't see doing a podcast the other way where I'm just talking. I want to be, I like Joe Rogan. Like Joe Rogan gets smarter every podcast he does.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
It's so funny when you break it down as to why are you doing this, right? And I say it's definitely because podcasts can be hard to monetize and all these different things. But when you get that extra, I know, man, I tell you, I can be totally honest. What days we do this on? We do it on Saturdays, right? My Saturdays are more productive than any other day.
Agreed.
I'm just gonna say it, right? Because there's something about. And the days that we don't do it, if we don't do it Saturday, nothing, nothing done. Exactly. Because there's something about kind of the getting in motion.
Yeah.
Right. Man, I was listening to a dude yesterday named Trevor, and he was with, I think he did a little thing with, I want to say Brian too. And he talked about when you do something right, your mind is like in motion. Your mind, the reticular activating system, because he kept going like this. And I was like, yeah, I know what that is. The mind says, oh, we're doing this, and it's in motion. So what we then talk about, the mind says, oh, that's already done. So it starts giving you more of that. So when I talk about being productive, that's exactly it. We're in motion. We're talking about something of a particular subject matter. We're hanging out. We're breaking a couple things down. Do we do a little bit of that beforehand? We do a little bragging. Hey, this guy asked me to be on this team, and yeah, I just made X amount of. I made that smarter. And then that day just keeps rolling.
Yep, I agree 100%.
It's a beautiful time for me. Right?
Yeah,
on
me
Saturday,
too.
I could say no to everything, and then do this stuff. Right.
Yep.
So that's a part of it, y'all.
So take all that with you, everybody. With the point we're trying to make is when you are able to, when you're in a leadership position, when you're a CEO, when you're an entrepreneur, and everything is on your shoulders, you need to intentionally put time in your life where you can just be instead of you having to be on. That's something that'll be helpful for you. Therapy is a place where you can do that. Other mentorship groups are a place where you can do that. CEO peer groups are a place where you can do that, and developing friendships with people that are similarly situated where you can do podcasts like this is an amazing thing.
There it is. So package this, y'all. If you've liked this, I was listening, man, I'm looking at somebody and they just come onto their video, and the first thing it says, like us, share, subscribe to us if you like this. I says, I haven't heard enough to like it. I'm literally talking to the TV, right? I'm like, why would I subscribe? But if you've heard this now, you like what you heard, comment, subscribe, and send it to somebody. Say, hey, listen to this. I do this now a lot. I'll grab a snippet and I'll say, at the 13th mark, check this out, right? Not to put that person on to somebody else, but just to say, here's information that I know you will get benefit from. So if you guys have you all have gotten benefit from this, send it to somebody. If you've got some parts in there, you says, listen from 13, whatever, send to somebody if you think that this has been of value. And of course, if you're brand new to the podcast and you hear us, hey, subscribe, follow us, DM us. We're a little bit of everywhere, right? If you look up our names and stuff like that. So get in touch with us and we will do anything we can to help you further. If you want to jump into some of the courses and classes that we're offering and all that kind of stuff, find them. We got buy buttons out there. All right.
There we
go.
That's
a wrap, my man. I appreciate you today.
All right, brother. It's been a pleasure as usual. Looking forward to it next time.
All right. Talk soon.